What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to go through some of your drafts, give you my thoughts, opinions, some of the possible players that you could look to change and who to bring in instead, and just generally some different things to think about. If you want to get your team rated for free, the My Team tool on Fantasy Football Hub is now live. I put a link in the description below. If you put your current draft in, it will give you a team rating. Mine's currently 92%, so see if you can beat that. If you can, leave me a comment below and let me know. So the first team we're going to look at is a 4-4-2 formation with Mo Salah in midfield, and this team rating comes out at 94%, which is a pretty impressive score, slightly higher than the first draft that I came up with. Now I do think this season, if you're going to go for a second premium attacker alongside Haaland, you do need to make some sacrifices. One that's been made here is no Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now I don't necessarily think that's a huge issue because there's so many good defender options between 5 and 5.5 million. But Trent has also been one of the best defenders over the last 5 seasons. So it is something to think about. We'll talk about it a little bit later because some of the other teams do have Trent in. The other sacrifice is Dominic Calvert-Lewin up front, who I know a lot of people aren't keen on. But I think for just 6 million, there is potential there. His last 2 seasons were pretty awful. But before that, he had a 16-goal and a 13-goal season. So we know what he's capable of. I just think he absolutely has to prove his fitness during pre-season. And if he doesn't, you've got to look elsewhere. Now, one thing to start thinking about, and it's nothing to panic about, but just start thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, you're going to start locking in formations and players that you definitely want. But if Calvert-Lewin is not an option by the game week 1 deadline, what's your plan B here? There are some other forwards at 6 million or below. Wisser at Brentford, Ferguson at Brighton, Morris at Luton, who's only 5.5 million, could be on penalties. But if I'm reading those names out and you're thinking I don't want any of them, that's fine. But then you've got to find money to upgrade Calvert-Lewin to someone else. And then you've got to start downgrading elsewhere. And if you really want Salah, well, then are you happy to get rid of Rashford or Saka or downgrade one of your defenders? It doesn't matter what the answer is, but that's just something to start thinking about. But right now, I think Calvert-Lewin's a pretty good pick. In defence, you've got Stones, Gabriel, Shaw and Estupiñán. I think Gabriel, Shaw and Estupiñán are going to be in a lot of drafts, so I won't cover them in great detail here. But just quickly on Gabriel, a lot of people keep asking me why I'm not mentioning Zinchenko or Saliba. I think if you look at the minutes over the last season or two, Gabriel has been fantastic. He's basically nailed on, always plays, and very rarely has gotten injured. So I think his minutes are slightly better than Zinchenko. And even if Zinchenko played the same minutes, I don't think he's necessarily that much more attacking either. Gabriel is a threat from set pieces. And then versus Saliba, he doesn't have the goal threat that Gabriel has. So that's pretty much it. Also, they've bought in Timber, who could play right centre-back. I know some people think he could come in for Gabriel instead, but I think Arteta will want that left-footed left centre-back. So I don't think there's any issues with Gabriel. That's why you keep hearing me talk about him as much as I do. You've got the double up with Arsenal defence because Ramsdale's in goal. I think Arsenal's fixtures in general, defensively and from an attacking point of view, are very good. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that you've got that double up in defence. The only thing to think about is what if Jesus, Havertz, Trossard, Martinelli, any of those players suddenly become a really good option, either because they're getting more minutes than we expected or because there's a possible injury. To pivot to double Arsenal attack, you'd have to make a transfer not only in defence but obviously also in your attack as well. And it might be worth it, but again, you've kind of blocked yourself from doing it in one move. If Rashford got injured, for example, in your midfield, you couldn't easily swap to an Odegaard or someone that. You'd have to look to a different team or make 2 transfers. So I like Ramsdale and Gabriel individually, but that's the only thing I would think about with the double up. John Stones is a player that I don't think has been mentioned a huge amount, not on my videos at least. I think he probably is one of your best bets to get I don't want to say nailed on for Man City, but a defender that's going to get quite a few minutes, right? We saw last year how integral he was to that system moving into midfield. And I think with the fixtures Man City have, there's loads of potential for clean sheets in the opening 6 or so game weeks. The only thing I would say about him is when we say he moves into midfield, I think people automatically assume he's then super attacking. I don't think that's necessarily the case. He's not like a Trent Alexander-Arnold. He's not as creative as that. He will pop up in the box, but his goal threat and assist potential isn't then necessarily massively high. So if that's why you're buying him, I would possibly just think about that again. He's just a great option in his own right because we expect his minutes to be good, and Man City should get plenty of clean sheets over the first few games. And he does have some goal threat. I just think we kind of overemphasize how high that is because he moves into midfield. But overall, a really solid option. And then you've just to fill out the other spots, you've got Saka and Mitoma, and I think they're really strong. Like for 6.5 million, it could be March instead, it could be Mbommo, but that's a pretty strong price point. On the bench, it's Mings, Nakamba, Archer, all from Aston Villa. Obviously, the easy thing to say there is you block being able to get like a Jacob Ramsey or a Buendia or a Watkins or a Moreno, you know, because you've already got 3 Aston Villa players. You could obviously transfer one of those out if you wanted to, but I think the point here is that Nakamba is probably or possibly going to go to Luton, and if that does happen, he's going to pretty much play every single game, and then you've got your 4.5 million midfielder. So I've looked quite a lot at trying to fit Salah in, and I think the easiest way to do it because of the value in defence is to play a back four, either a 4-4-2 or a 4-5-1, and that's kind of what this setup is. The bench isn't that strong, but if you want Salah, like I said, you've got to make sacrifices. No Trent and Calvert-Lewin up front and a pretty weak-ish bench. It could work out nicely. So I'm not going to do this for every draft, but I wanted to quickly show you how the My Team tool works over on Fantasy Football Hub. If you want to get your own team rating, just click that link in the description below, input your current draft. It's completely free to do. I've put the team in that I've just spoken about. That's given that 94% team rating. And then on the screen, it will show you a few things. So you've got the next 3 fixtures for each player. So if you see a couple of dodgy fixtures coming up, then you can start planning your transfers around that. It will also give you projected points as well, and then you can just start messing around with different players to see if you can get a better rating. So for example, if I wanted to take Salah out and put Bruno Fernandes in, who again, very popular option, that gives me 4 million to spend. Straight away I'm thinking, could I upgrade Calvert-Lewin? Well, one player I like is Jesus. Obviously I'd have to get rid of one of my Arsenal players, so I'm going to get rid of Ramsdale. I'm actually going to put Kepa in, who isn't being talked about much, but if you want to cover that Chelsea defence and you don't want a Chilwell or a Reece James, right now you would assume he's the number 1 keeper, and you've still got 4 million to spend, so I'm just going to do Calvert-Lewin straight to Jesus, and that will give me 2 million in the bank. But not only that, it's also put my team rating up to 96%. Now, the way that I would use this tool is not to say you definitely can't go for the 94% team because the 96% team is definitely better, but it gives you something to think about. You can question why it thinks Jesus, Fernandes and Kepa is better than Ramsdale, Salah and Calvert-Lewin. It might be because of the fixtures, whatever it might be, minutes and stuff like that. If you don't agree, that's perfectly fine. Just stick with the team you want to go for. But this could help you with some of your decision making as well. And if you're not sure what transfers you want to make, they've got an AI transfers tool as well that will start generating different moves that you could go for. So I didn't actually check what transfers it was going to suggest before I started recording. But interestingly, it's also gone for Salah to Bruno Fernandes. Even though his points projection is a little bit lower, it's because it lets you make other upgrades elsewhere, like Nakamba to Mbommo and Calvert-Lewin to Watkins. Again, you don't have to go for those suggested transfers, but it gives you something to think about. To get your team rated, it's absolutely free. If you want to use some of the other features, there's memberships on offer up to 50% off at the moment, and if you don't win your mini league, they'll give you your money back. Terms and conditions apply. All links in the description below. So Team 2 is a 3-5-2 formation, very popular in pre-season. The back 3 is Shaw, Estupiñán and Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now I am very undecided whether or not Trent's going to make my final team. He was in my first draft video that I did last week, but since then I keep building teams without him, and every time I do, I really like how they look, and now I'm wondering whether I definitely need him. And possibly because of that, I'm starting to find more negatives than positives. So I am kind of conscious that maybe some bias is creeping in. But if you look at the fixtures for Liverpool from a clean sheet perspective, in the first 8 matches, they played Chelsea away, Newcastle away, Wolves away, Spurs away and Brighton away. Now, outside of maybe Wolves, I would expect all 4 of those other teams to score. Forget about who's going to win or lose the game. For FPL, I'm only really worried about the clean sheet, and I think they could lose it plenty of times in those matches. To be fair, outside of that, it's Bournemouth at home, Villa at home and West Ham at home, and they all come in the first 6 game weeks. So I'm really, when I'm adding in Spurs and Brighton, it is with a longer viewpoint, but this is a player that you probably will just put in your team and kind of forget about. So for the first 8 game weeks, I'm kind of saying to myself, do I definitely need him? The problem is after that, the fixtures are great, So how will I then get him in? Obviously, it's much easier just to start with him. And he is a great player. I'm not saying he's not. He's going to get plenty of attacking returns. I would definitely expect Liverpool's defensive record to be better. So they could still pick up some clean sheets in those matches. So in isolation, I cannot sit here and say he's a bad pick because he's not. But you have to look at what it does to the rest of your team. A little bit like with Mo Salah, what sacrifices have to be made. One that's been made here is with the bench. You got a £4 million goalkeeper. Everyone's going to do that. Not really an issue. But then you got two £4 million defenders in Bell and Bayer, and then a 4.5 million forward. So I know how people tend to think about the bench, that, okay, look, if someone from my first 11 misses out, so be it. At least Bell and Bayer are going to play. They can come on and get me points. And that may well happen. But I think right now, most of us are not expecting those two players to get many clean sheets or many attacking returns either. But it's not just them coming off your bench when you're not expecting it. It's also about how useful a good bench can be, you know, in kind of 3, 4, 5 game weeks time, whenever it might be. Let's say, I don't know, from this team, Rashford picks up a bit of an injury. He's not out for a long time, but he might miss 1 or 2 games. Well, because you've got a pretty weak bench, you probably then be forced into transferring Rashford out. If you had a decent 4.5 or even a £5 million defender with good fixtures, if Rashford gets injured for 1 or 2 games, but he's someone you really want to keep longer term, there's not really another midfielder that you want to bring in, you can just play that defender instead. Whereas if you had to play Bell or Bayer for 2 weeks, would you really want to do that? Probably not. I think this is traditionally how most people build squads. It's definitely how I used to go as cheap as possible on the bench. But I do think there's some merit in having like a 4.5 or a £5 million defender there. But of course, if you do that, you've got to take some money out of your team. And where do you suddenly look to? Probably Trent, maybe Martinelli. So it really depends how you want to set the side up. In midfield, you got Enciso, 5.5 million. Now, if he gets regular minutes, he's going to be great because that Brighton team will continue to score plenty of goals. I'm just not so sure that's going to be the case. I think the way I'm looking at it right now is McAllister was playing number 10. He's now not there. Who's going to come in instead? Enciso. But they could just play with 2 forwards. They got Ferguson, Welbeck and Undav. And they've also bought João Pedro. Where's he going to play? If March is going to be right wing, Matoma left wing, and we think Ferguson's going to play quite regularly up front, or at least start, I don't know, at least every other game or something like that. Where does João Pedro fit in? He could play in that number 10 role as well. So I don't think there's any guarantee over Enciso's minutes. And sure, if he doesn't start, he'll probably come off the bench. But if he doesn't play at all, well, then you're left with Bell and Bayer. So I think overall this team is quite strong. But I think there's maybe slight issues with having Enciso and that bench. And even Phil Foden is not a guarantee. Obviously, you could just use 7.5 million as a placeholder and put in someone like Maddison instead, who's probably going to get more regular minutes. But overall, I just think, how many risks do I want in my team? And I would say that the bench, Foden and Enciso, are maybe slight risks. I don't mind triple Arsenal attack. I think that's similar to what Praz had in his draft that we discussed the other day. I think Martinelli is probably good for starts. Him, Jesus and Saka is likely to be the front 3. When I say that Martinelli is going to have maybe slightly reduced minutes, I mean more from Trossard coming off the bench rather than starting. But I guess it is a small concern. So I just think for my Game Week 1 team, I don't want to be forced into too many transfers. And I think unless we see something from pre-season that tells me Enciso and Foden are definitely going to start regularly, I think there's early transfers possibly waiting to happen. So it's all well and good saying stuff like Trent will definitely outscore or match the £8 million midfielders. Will Enciso match the 5.5 million defenders? Possibly not. So you could have, like, I don't know, Stones and Maddison instead of Trent and Enciso. Would that be better? Possibly. Just something to think about. Overall, a really solid squad, 82% team rating. So we talked about the sacrifices that might be needed to get one of Trent or Salah into your squad. But what if you want both alongside Haaland? One solution could be the 4-5-1 formation. In theory, it works well because to fund the premiums, you need cheap players. And generally, for 6.5 million or below, there's more options in defence and midfield than there is in the forward line. If you think about the sheer volume of 5 to 5.5 million defenders, most of them are going to outscore the 5 to 5.5 million forwards. So that's the idea, but it does pose plenty of problems, one of which is the bench. You've got Bayer, £4 million defender, then you've got 2 4.5 million forwards, and as it stands right now, none of them are guaranteed minutes. They might get a cameo off the bench and get you 1 point, but that's not even guaranteed to happen either. So if Haaland was to miss out at any stage, you'd be down to 10 men. Now you might turn around and say, well, hang on a second, I've got Trent, Salah and Haaland. If Haaland misses out like one game in the first 10 game weeks, does that really matter? I've probably made up plenty of points. That could be the case. But also, you've got no backup on the bench if something happens to one of those first 11 players. If they have a minor injury, where they're out for a week or two, you're pretty much forced straight into a transfer because you're not going to want to play Bayer. And unless we get really lucky, there is no 4.5 million forwards. As I've said before in other videos, if one becomes available that's going to get regular starts, whole conversation changes. Lots of people start thinking about this formation. But right now, I'm not sure it works, especially when in your midfield you've got Foden, who again maybe is not a big issue because you could just go to Maddison, you could save 0.5 million on Sterling, but also in Ciso. And again, I've just spoken about him. He's not guaranteed minutes either. So it's not just the bench, it's also the 11 as well. For what it's worth, most of the players you see there, so Ramsdale, Trent, Gabriel Shaw, Estupiñán, Mbeumo, Saka, Salah and Haaland, 9 players I would expect to start every single week. So if you could just sort out Foden and Ciso, or you were willing to take the risk, this could work. Personally, I'd rather have at least one more playing player on the bench. The one that I've been looking at for this formation is Adebayo at Luton. He's only 5 million. As long as they don't sign any other players and they keep playing with 2 up front, he should get regular minutes. Whether or not that's going to happen, we'll figure out closer to game week 1 when we see pre-season and stuff like that. But he's only 5 million. So straight away, you could go from Ramsdale to a 4.5 million goalkeeper like Flecken, Brighton keeper, Pickford, whoever you want, and then just upgrade one of those 4.5s to Adebayo. Is it perfect? No, but I think that would be better. I would want someone on the bench that I could not necessarily rely on, but is going to play more regularly and is more reliable than what you have right now. So if Enciso had a bad fixture or wasn't getting regular time, you could just play that Luton forward instead. If you've got more money to spend, like 5.5, 6, then fair enough, right? But then you'd have to start making sacrifices elsewhere. So again, it's just that question. Are Trent and Salah good enough? And they are, right? They're brilliant. I can't believe I just said that. They're brilliant options, but are they going to be enough to warrant what I would consider a slightly weaker side? Is it better to have more money elsewhere and just reduce one or both of those options down? I do, again, they're great. I want to reiterate that. Salah and Trent, great. Great options. But I do wonder how much Bournemouth at home in game week 2 is playing on people's minds. If this Bournemouth fixture was game week 6 and every other fixture moved up, would people be so worried? I'm not sure they would. If you're going to captain Salah ahead of Haaland in game week 2, go for it. But after you've still got to hold those players afterwards, and they'll continue to get you points. It's just whether or not someone else will get more points instead. Let's, for example, right, and I'm going to do the maths on the fly here. I should have really worked it out before. And we're not going to be able to do it because it's not going to show it, is it? It's going to show last season's points per match. Salah, 6.3. And Enciso was... Where is he? 2.9, right? So what's that? That's 9.2, I think. Yeah, we'll go with 9.2. I think I'm just about right. You can do the maths yourself. If we look at kind of who you haven't got here, like even like Salah and Enciso, right? You could pretty much have Rashford and Bruno Fernandes. Well, Rashford was at 5.9, nearly 6, and Bruno Fernandes was 4.8. So I think that's 10.7 if I've done my maths right. Now, I'm not saying those 4 players will score exactly the same points per match for this whole season or in the first 6 to 8 weeks, but that's the kind of thing I would consider. If you're going to captain Haaland every week anyway, is Salah and Enciso really better than Rashford and Bruno Fernandes? I would say probably not, but let me know what you think in the comments below. So I wanted to talk about this team because it's a little bit different. And I know that some people get frustrated during pre-season because they feel like they're seeing the same team over and over again, and they prefer to think a little bit more differential. For what it's worth, I do think it's a myth that you have to go different to climb up the ranks, but that's probably a conversation for another day. For now, let's talk about this team. Just on the goalkeeper situation, the team was sent in with Martinez from Aston Villa as a placeholder for Onana. So I've just assumed that he is going to sign for Man United and that he will be 5 million. So I'll talk about him in a second. One thing I'm going to say straight away, and it's going to contradict somewhat what I've just said on the other teams, I think the bench is too strong. When I talk about having a slightly stronger bench, I'm thinking £4.5, £5 million defender that could be relied upon if needed. I think with this team, even if you bench Pedro Porro, you've still got either Sterling at 7 million or Mboma at 6.5 million on the bench. That's just too much money for me. So I would sort out the squad structure straight away. You can definitely put less money on the bench, more into your first 11. I think when you're looking to go different, you want to still assure that the player you're going for is going to get regular minutes. And I'm not sure that's going to be the case with Diaz and Gakpo. Like, if I said to you right now, I already know the Liverpool team for game week 1. Salah's on the right, Darwin's through the middle, Jota's on the left. Would that sound completely shocking? Like, would you be shocked by that? Probably not. So that tells me straight away that Diaz and Gakpo are slight issues. For what it's worth, at the end of last season, Gakpo was the first choice number 9, and he was playing quite regularly, so that could be the case again. But it wouldn't be that surprising if Darwin played through the middle or if he played the odd game in the first 5 to 6 weeks. So I'm not sure, without injuries to any of those 4 players outside of Salah, that I would be looking to put them into my team. And for what it's worth, I think when you think about differentials, we sometimes overthink it. Like, if we look at the midfield team selected by, once you get down to Odegaard at 20.4%, every other midfielder is less than 20% owned. I would consider that differential enough. They don't have to be like 3, 4, 5% owned. So Maddison, for example, is 17.6% owned. Now, of course, if he scores like 3 or 4 goals in pre-season, that's going to shoot up, right? You can come back and check this before game week 1. But right now, I would consider Maddison a differential, but also a player I would expect to get regular starts and regular minutes. Something I wouldn't be confident right now in saying about Diaz or Gakpo. So I'd be a little bit unsure about those Liverpool players. In terms of the double Chelsea attack, Sterling and Nkunku, I actually prefer that to the double Liverpool attack as it stands, only because I'm more confident about their minutes. I think Sterling will be first choice left wing, and I think Nkunku, whether he's playing number 9, number 10, whatever it is, I think he'll get regular starts as well. Sterling is a player that's priced at 7 million, that has been 12 million in the past. He's also got more than 200 points twice. We know what he's capable of. He could be really underpriced here, so I like him. And with Nkunku, 7.5, I think he's one of the picks of the £7.5 million forwards, and he could be on penalties as well. And I think from game week 3, Chelsea's fixtures are great. Okay, first 2 game weeks are maybe not completely ideal. It's Liverpool at home and West Ham away. But after that, things are looking great. Let me get the fixtures here. Luton at home, Forest at home, Bournemouth away, Villa at home, Fulham away, Burnley away. Really good fixtures, so you could get ahead of the curve. I know what a lot of people are going to do. They're going to wait to see how Chelsea perform in the first 2 games. Then they're going to decide which attacker to get in. Nothing wrong with that strategy, but there will be other stuff that crops up. So if you've already got those players in ahead of that fixture turn, then you can worry about making other transfers instead. So I think in isolation, both Nkunku and Sterling are good options. Whether or not you want to go for the double up depends on your kind of risk appetite, how differential you want to go. But I like both of them. With Pedro Porro, again, I had him on my £5 million defender video. I think there's potential there because he could be deployed as a very attacking fullback. Postecoglou could improve Spurs. There's obviously question marks there, so there's a leap of faith if you're going to go for him. The obvious replacement would be someone like Estepinian if you want to go safer. But as a differential, I really like Pedro Porro. And just lastly, on Onana, I think at 5 million, he's definitely going to compete with Kepa and Ramsdale and goalkeepers like that at the same price. I think he's way more comfortable on the ball than De Gea ever was. So he's going to receive more passes and therefore probably make more as well. That should help with bonus. I would just question whether a double up on Man United defence is worthwhile. I feel like you either go for Shaw or you go for Onana. In the first 5 weeks, you got Spurs away, Arsenal away, Brighton at home. Of course, Shaw could get attacking returns. Onana could get bonus and save points. But I'm not sure I would want both of them. I would probably lose one or the other, whichever one you prefer. But overall, I think for a differential squad, it's definitely a good starter. I think you can get much different players that are more assured minutes than Diaz and Gakpo, and I would probably reduce one of those players on the bench. If you want double up on Chelsea attack, perfectly fine. Just downgrade Mboma to someone else, or maybe even get rid of Gakpo to a £4.5 million forward and play you know, 451, 352 or something like that instead. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give it a like, hit that subscribe button to try and help me hit 400,000 subscribers. And if you want your team rated for free, there is a link in the description below to use the other features and get a premium membership on Fantasy Football Hub. There's up to 50% off at the moment. And if you don't win your mini league, they will give you your money back. Terms and conditions apply. All the links you can need are in the description below. I'll catch you tomorrow for another video.